the beginning of our new mini 3-week course. So I'm doing it in short batches in order that you don't get overwhelmed. You can pick and choose what you want to do. There's no obligation to turn up every week, but just a bit of you know, a prompt in the week so that each week doesn't merge into the other. So you've got something specific to do on a Tuesday morning, but you don't have to do the classes. So if you just like the chatter and you like to follow along, just take it like that. Don't feel under any stress or pressure that you've got to come up with the goods and go off and make all these arrangements. We're supposed to be having a fun activity, and most of you here anyway come to the Monday morning coffee morning, so that's the place where we do our general chatter. So you're not gagged normally. We do have our general chatter on a Monday morning. So for this next 3 weeks, again, I'm concentrating on DIY crafty activities, but there is always a flower arranging element to them. So as soon as I feel confident about going out to buy flowers, I will introduce flowers in a more conventional way. But at the moment, I am raiding my craft box, raiding the limited supplies I've got in my garden, in the hope that perhaps you're in the same position as me too. I know some of you have got fabulous gardens and you'll have lots of things to choose from, and others who are living in flats and don't have access to much outdoor open space at all. So today's task, I'm going to do the big reveal at the end, but show you the mini bits that get towards the big reveal, just to keep the tension and the suspense going. So I really love making Christmas stories. It's not Christmas, you've got a bit of a time to wait. So I've got to show you 4 little mini wreaths. I'm trying to do everything I can not to call them Christmas stories, because these mini wreaths, I think, are suitable for all year round enjoyment, depending on how you make them. Obviously, if you've got tinsel and fairy lights on, they're still going to look like Christmas stories. So I'm thinking of them as a welcome ring that you could put up on a wall or a door. Sometimes I like the idea of taking off a picture frame and putting a little ring on there as well. And that's that sense of life, you know, the cycle of life from beginning to full life to well, I'm trying not to say death, to death as well, or a bit like the life cycle for flower, you know, the bud, the full bloom, that sets the seed, and then it dies again and gets reborn with the seed growth. So I think the flower is a lovely symbol. You don't need me. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. There's a bit of homeschooling going on in the background. Apparently today is options day, and there's expecting an email about what GCSEs is going to be doing. I don't suppose you'd mind awfully taking the phone away to another room. Thank you. So the schooling is finished. It's 10 past 10 and she's finished for the day, so I'm not quite sure actually how much schooling is going on. But back to the matter in hand. I'm going to show you how to make some mini wreaths, and the reason why I've made them small is because I just don't have the space to make big wreaths, and the bigger you make your wreath, the longer it's going to take you to do, and the more materials you're going to have. So I'm going to start off really small, and what I'm going to show you first of all is an entry-level wreath. So that is the size I'm making my wreaths, and that is about 11 centimetres. I quite like the nude naked look. It's all a matter of taste. You may not like this at all, in which case, the more trails you add into this, the bigger and more robust it will look. But also you could add in greenery as well in a very traditional flower arranging kind of way. So what I have started off is with ivy. So we've got lots of ivy. It's the only thing that seems to grow really well in our garden. We've got it hanging over from the fence next door. And what I have done is stripped off the leaves. Actually, I've got done ahead of time, some of them. So I've got a bit of ivy and I'm stripping off the leaves like this. And I'm chucking them on the floor because my husband's out walking the dog. He'd never know that the kitchen was a mess. And I'm going to make a wreath out of that. So it may be that you might not have ivy, but perhaps you've got wisteria growing, or clematis, or Virginia creeper. It can be anything that's got quite a supple, it needs to be supple. Even silver birch branches would be really good. And the way I make my rings is to, now this will ring some bells with you. So those of you who were on the no foam eco flower arranging, I did one of these little twists as one of the, I think it was the last project in the vase. I used this sort of same technique to create the flower frog in my vase. So what I'm doing is I'm circling round, holding the fixing in my hand, and then with a bit left over, finishing it off. So I've got the simplest of little rings here. If I let go, it's just going to ping apart. So I'm doing everything I can at the moment not to let go. So I am holding it where this last piece was, take the next bit of flexible stem, and I'm using the woody stiff end to pinch next to my fingers, and I'm going to sew with the flexible end and go in and out. And I think probably this is a technique you've either seen me use before, or you may well have done this before as well. It's nothing new here. And the more you add in, the more robust your little frame will become. And that will depend on the materials you've got available and also your personal style as well. If you decide it's pinging all over the place, you may want to tie off with string as you go, or overbind it with string, and have that as part of your detail, that you're showing off the string. So it's not a competition to see whether you can get this little mini wreath to stay together with sort of no apparent fixings. You do what suits you best. You don't need to challenge it. And every time I finish, that's my last bit here, I hold it there and I slide my next bit of stem in. I'm sort of pushing it through like that to lock it in. And I do that because I want to make sure I've got a consistent thickness all the way around. And if you start from the same place each time, you may find that you've got a very lush part, and then it gets very skinny at the other end. So I think probably I've got a bit more, but I'm going to stop that now. Now I've got this last bit here, and I will just tuck it in. So it's almost like we're sewing. And at this stage, I should be able to let go. So I can let go, and that would be your absolutely basic mini wreath. As I say, I quite like it like this. It may be that you know, if you're neat and tidy, you might want to chop off these the woody bits that are sticking up. The only problem is once you start chopping one thing, you end up chopping loads and loads. I've sort of got a letter Q here, so I can come in like that and neaten things off. I quite like the wispy bits, but again, it's personal taste as to whether you like the wispy bits. Now I am going to leave my wreath like that. That is my entry level wreath. I've gone a bit chunkier on this one, but if you didn't like the bare bones and you thought it was too stark, you could wind other greenery, and you perhaps even keep the ivy with its leaves on, and then you would have a lovely circular green. But if you're keeping this for any period of time, the ivy leaves are going to die, whereas the fresh stems are going to die as well, but they will look like they're drying and being intentional, rather than you've got something physically dead hanging up. So that is my number one entry level little mini ring. The next one involves a bit of paper crafting. So I have got here a book that I got from the charity shop with the express purpose of ripping it up. So I've also got a ruler and some bendy wire. Now this, if you're used to going to flower arranging classes, you may well have seen this or used it before, but it's the aluminium wire that is quite chunky. It comes in a whole variety of colours. It's a bit like a slinky, and I'm going to cut myself off a length of the wire. Now, just by coincidence, absolute coincidence, the circle of that is the same as the circle of that. It's just meant to be, and which just happens to be, for I know my finished project, I want all my rings to be about this size. So it's just absolute pot luck, the size that I made my wreaths. And of course, the size that you make them will depend on how you're going to display them. So we'll talk a bit more about displaying them at the end. So I'm going to show you what this mini wreath looks like in order that you can visualize it, but that is what it looks like. So it's ripped up pieces of book like that. And again, it might not be to your taste, but it might spring an idea of something you could use. One thing I did think I could have done, which I'm not going to show you, is making a rag wreath. Now I know Lynette, when we were at the coffee morning yesterday, I think I remember you saying you were starting to cut up old clothes to make dolls' clothes, and I thought actually you could cut up some rags and tie them onto a little mini ring, and you could have a little rag ring as well, which is quite easy to do. That'll be, I'm not going to show you how to do that. So what I'm going to do with my book, I feel very naughty ripping this book up. I'm not going to measure. I'm just using my ruler as a straight edge, and I'm conscious that you can't really see what I'm doing, but there will be a video at the end of the whole course where I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I have used, gosh, that is very pale, isn't it? Let's find a page that's got a bit more text on it. Hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I am using my ruler to get a straight line. Now, if you are super, Sue's saying, could you use leaves? You could do. You could pierce leaves on here and thread them round, fold them up, but you'd need to get the right kind of leaf that it wasn't going to rip and would hold up quite well. So perhaps bay leaves, because you know they'll dry, they're quite leathery, you'll know they'll dry, and you could either stack them up, a bit like the old-fashioned, you know, in old period dramas, and you've got somebody who's in a shop and they put the receipts on a thing like that. You could put your leaves on like that. So you could either stack them up, or you could fold them a little bit, bend them so it looked like little pieces like this. And that would fill up a bit faster, but you will need loads and loads of leaves. I've done that before. You'll need more leaves than you ever imagine you do, because of course as they stack, they'll look nice and lush when you first put them on, but they will dry and shrink a little bit, and they will slide on that the wire as well, because it's so smooth. But that would definitely be another option. But I'm going to do the paper here, so I'm scoring a line just so. I'm just folding, scoring a line. Oh, it doesn't even show, does it? Let's be really precise. Can you? I have used my ruler to score. Oh, you can see that now. There. That's what I'm trying to show you. Ooh, get my angles right. I'm trying to show you that I folded my paper. I could cut my paper if I wanted to, and that would give me really neat lines. But I quite like, can you see, this is exaggerated, this sort of nibbled edge across the bottom. I quite like that textural detail, and that's why I'm going to rip. And you could hand rip the paper, but it's quite hard to stay on track with your ripping, which is why I sort of butt it up against my ruler, again in my best teacherly style, and I rip off against my ruler like that, and you get a piece of paper. I'm basically ripping off strips of paper like that, and you can see where I did it freehand down here. It's got a bit more nibbled, and it just gives you a more consistent edge. This wreath took about 6 pages from my book, so it is time consuming. So it was quite a nice job to do, because, you know, it's not difficult, but it is a prep thing. But it may be that you might be able to sit there of an evening, you know, in front of the telly, and you can be here ripping off bits of book. And it may be that, you know, you spend 10 minutes doing that, having a chat with whoever's at home, and then, you know, the next evening you start to fold them, and then you thread them on afterwards. So it doesn't have to be a total conveyor belt. It's supposed to be an enjoyable creative process. And then what I've got, when you've got your 6 pages of book that have been ripped out, I found for my wire and my size, my sort of 1 centimetre strip worked best. And then I'm going to concertina the paper, so folding it back and forth. And again, you don't need to be massively precise, unless of course you are by nature a precise person. So I'm ending up with lots of bits of paper like that, which I then pierce onto my little ring. So you can have a little production line. If you've got small children, you know, coming to visit, socially distant, throw them an old book, tell them to get ripping, and how, you know, say you want 127 of these before they leave. So that's what I'm making. And then to put them onto my ring, what I will do is recut my wire in order that it's got the sharpest point possible. I think you might be able to see a flash of silver there where I've sharpened the wire, and then pierce it through. So I've gone through once there. But when you get more confident, you can go through 2 layers at once, but just making sure that you're not piercing your finger. And again, you can't do this quickly because you've got to go through every single one. You're touching every bit of paper, and then you thread them on and then decide whether you want them to be tight together, or perhaps if you've got a coloured wire, whether you want to space them out a little bit so you can see a flash of the wire showing through it. So again, it's entirely up to you, and to pierce it through like that. And then you spend half an hour, 20 minutes piercing until you've gone all the way round to the other side. So that is the second mini wreath. And you can imagine, I'm not going to show you how to do that, but you have them all lined up. And then when you come to fix your ring together, what I then did was sharpen the other end where I wasn't threading the wires on. So that was where I was threading them on. And then you come back because you need to join it. And then I did the same thing so that there's a few folds that have got 2 wires going through, because I needed to join them up. So if I show you that, the first few folds, I'm not quite sure, you can see it's got 2 wires running through it, so that just holds it together. Or you can get a glue gun out and just glue it. So you can imagine that you just keep going. So that those 2 little strips have made about a centimetre chunk, which isn't very much. And then you keep going, and then you have another little mini wreath ring like that. So that's number 2. Number 3, I'm going to take my paper off there because I can use that again for number 3, is I'm going to make one with silk flowers. So a very pretty, dainty little mini wreath. And again, it depends what you've got in your toolbox. So I do seem to be majoring on Lynette at the moment, but I know Lynette has some pipe cleaners. So this is made up with pipe cleaners. I decided I only wanted to go part way around with my silk flowers, and I wanted to get something for the silk flowers to glue on. So if you are trying to glue onto wire with a hot glue gun, it can be quite difficult to do. So I've wrapped my piece of wire in a pipe cleaner to begin with, to give me this sort of tufty texture for my glue to take hold. And I know because you're crafting and looking at things, you want to see what it looks like at the back. I can see trails of glue there. So it's a wreath ring, a white covered wreath ring with silk flowers on the front. And again, it's not difficult to make, quite easy to go. So I shall take a couple of pipe cleaners, and you need to tie them on to start with. So I'm just twisting the 2 together to start with, like that. And then spinning it around. And again, it's quite a methodical, just make sure you're not going to scratch your face as you do it. If you feel you need a dab of hot glue as you go, you could do that. So I'm just winding round all the way down. And again, how many? I think it probably took about 3 or 4 pipe cleaners to cover. So round and round and round and round. I think you probably get the idea with this. And you go all the way down to the end and then bring it back, and you need to have a little bit of overlap at the back. So when you come to fix it, I did put a dab of glue on the fixing, and then as I came through with my last bit of pipe cleaner, I went over the join with the pipe cleaner, and it held quite firm. These are all quite lightweight, so you may find you don't even need a glue gun. The fixing will be enough just with pipe cleaner going over. And then I added in the silk flowers. So I decided what I wanted to create just a little bit of an accent here. You know, if you want to go all the way around, you go all the way around. You could even put even less flowers than that on it and just have 1 or 2 flowers. Or perhaps if you had you know, a silk flower that was an orchid or something like that, you know, it's better to show something that's really beautiful like that, perhaps as a single flower. And actually orchids would work really well as a silk flower because they're quite flat, and you want to make sure you're not putting anything on too bulky and too heavy. So I would say probably if you had roses as a silk flower, it's going to be stick out too much. So the flowers I chose were quite small and quite flattish. So they were a cherry blossom flower. A bit of cherry blossom. So that has been sticking in the vase. It's getting denuded now. So the way these are made, you can just pick them off really easily. So you don't have to cut them. You can just pick the flowers off. And then you get your hot glue gun. And what I would do with my hot glue, I think the temptation with the hot glue gun is to always put the glue on the end of the stem. This sticky up bit. I would always glue it so you like lie the glue along the petal, because when you come to add it onto your frame, you want the flowers to lie. You don't actually want them sticking up because they're going to be vulnerable to falling off. You want them to lie down a bit more like that. So you just have fun with that. And I've got a mix there of the fully open, the larger bloom. There's probably 3 sizes. There's the fully open cherry blossom, a part open, and then more of a bud looking one. And I just made sure when I finished off that the smallest flowers are at the end. So it did look as if it was tapering off at the end. And then I thought I would put a pretty bow on it. So I actually tied that bow and then glued it on. If you try tying a bow onto something that's 3D, it ends up a bit skew-iff. So a lot of flower arranging and floristry is faking it up. So I made the bow first of all and just glued it on the end. And I didn't have a narrow ribbon. So that actually is a full width ribbon that I've cut up in the middle. And if you're really eagle-eyed, can you see it's just beginning to fray at the edges there? So again, it's needs must. I wasn't going to go out and order a bit of ribbon. I did have some narrow work, but it was the wrong colour, so I went with the colour that was right. So the ribbon that I used was a gingham ribbon like that, and you can see where I've cut it to reduce it in size. So I would say you can make your life a lot easier by using a narrow ribbon. And then to make the ribbon, the bow, you know, normally when you tie a bow, you do a knot first and then you make your bow. I didn't do the knot to begin with. So I made my loops and then went round and I pulled the loops through. So it's sort of a notchless loop. And you end up when you first start with, you know, a really naff looking bow that doesn't look very good. And then you have to spend a little bit of time because you want the loops and the tails to sit equally. I gently pull them to even it out, and then I pull on the tail a little bit and flatten out the loops of the ribbon, so you can play around with it until you're really happy. So let's pretend that I'm happy with that. And when you are really happy with the shape of it, you've got nice shaped loops on it and you've got the tails about the right length, I would then make the loops a tiny bit smaller. So I'm going to pull on the tail just to make them a fraction the size smaller. And then grab the loops and briskly pull sharply. So it just tightens up, and you might need to do that a couple of times. So you don't pull it tightly until you're sure that it is the perfect looking bow, like that. And then even up the edges. So it depends whether you want the tails to be the same length or lopsided. Sometimes I put them lopsided because I think it looks a little bit nicer. But what I would always do is to dovetail the edges. So I fold the ribbon in half and then cut from the folded end up and out. And it just stops the ribbon fraying and gives a nice finish to the ribbon. But as I'm working with this, it's fraying because it wasn't designed to be cut. But I'm just going to embrace that. It'll forever be my quarantine bow. I made it out of what I had. And then you would glue that, the hot dab of hot glue, and that would then sit on your wreath ring, and you'd end up with something that looked a bit like that. So you have to let me know in the comments which one you prefer so far. And if I've stepped out of your comfort zone, I think probably I'm going to bring you back. There's a bit more green in the next one. So Joan, you're asking about the aluminium wire one. So you're right, one end, I sharpened one end and zigzag that went through the concertinaed paper. And then when I get rid of that pipe cleaner, imagine that was my sharp end. And I've got all my zigzagged paper on. I keep pushing it on, pushing it on. And I've ended up with, so that was the first bit of paper I added, and that was the last bit. And I come round, and then I sharpened the other end. And basically what I did, I crossed the wires over like that. So hidden inside my concertina paper is a short section that's got 2 wires running through it. And that's how I finished it off. So it overlaps a little bit. And if you wanted to, actually that one, can you just see that bit of red wire there? That's part of the overlap. And if you wanted to hold it together, you could hot glue between the end and the beginning papers and just pinch them together, and that would hold it. But it's that's happened inside, that they've overlapped a little bit. The first few pieces have got 2 wires running through them to hold it all together. So are you ready for the last one? So the last wreath has got conifer in it. So again, I've chosen conifer because I hate conifer, and I'm on a personal mission to destroy every conifer hedge in the country. Not really, but it's what I had to hand. And I think possibly you might have seen me do this before if you're in my Flower Start World Facebook group, or I can see Wilf watching. We have a little fairy pal joining us, and I'm using it because it is evergreen, it's robust, and again, like my twiggy wreath at the beginning, it will dry out and it will die off, but actually because it is an evergreen, it will still retain an element of greenness. So it's not as if I'm using totally lush, fresh greenery. There will be a bit of longevity to it. So the way I'm going to create this wreath is I've got 2 floristry wires, but I could use, in hindsight, I could have used more of the aluminium wire. And I've taken 2 wires because I needed to make sure they would bend to make the circumference that was similar. Oh, it's very pale, isn't it? That was similar to the other shape. What I might use for demonstration purposes is my wire, because I think you can see that a bit better. I use floristry wires for that other one. And what I will then do is take some mossing wire and attach it on the top. So I'm just doing a few wraps around. I don't know whether you can see that, but you can imagine what I'm doing. And then this is so easy to make, but so effective. I take a couple of stems of the conifer. I lie my floristry wire or my aluminium wire on top. So you can see it's almost running down like the spine. You can see the stem. You can see the stems there, the woody stem showing up. I'm taking my wire and I'm laying that on top of the woody stem. It doesn't have to be accurate. When you do it, so you'll do it much more intuitively. And then I'm going to crunch all the other green around the edge and then wrap. So you'll see what I'm doing in a minute. I'm wrapping around to make a green sausage. So everything that is flat and lush and sticking out comes along and does that. I'm getting the 10-minute warning, ladies. So I'm going to, how does time fly? I am going to take you off mute as I do this. Let's see whether we can mute, unmute, unmute. Oops. So you continue on. Same thing, adding in more greenery as you go. And the same way you did before, join in the two ends, and you finish off like that. So what I wanted to show you is that where I'm going to put my mini wreath, I made myself a little sign that says home, like a little welcome sign, and HOME, and where the O is, this is where I cut my signs. And is that a round of applause I hear at the end there? So that is the idea. So you don't need to do anything. You could just make these little wreaths and hang them all around the house, but I've made a little wooden sign. Think of a word that's got an O in it that means something to you. So it could be joy, it could be love, it could be flowers. I'm going to stay there. And you can add that in. So that's the whole point of the exercise, is creating little O's to do a welcome sign. In fact, I could have written welcome. And I have got that propped up. Again, I don't have any hanging space in my house. So I've got that propped up, and I'll post a photograph to you when I send you the video. But it's propped up behind the chair in my kitchen as a sort of welcome sign. So there